Hi, welcome to this episode of B2B Tech Marketing Talks podcast, where we engage with leading marketing and channel leaders to get fresh perspectives and practical advice on the latest trends, effective strategies, and best practices for B2B tech marketing. I'm your host, Jeremy Balius. Today's theme is channel strategy. I'm very excited because I'm joined by Harald Horgen today. Harald is an acknowledged expert on the challenges of building a successful international channel for technology products. He's the president and founder of the York Group, an international business development organization with partners across all major geographies. He's been opening new markets for clients since 1993, personally involved in setting up channels in Europe, Asia, Latin America, and Africa, working with clients of all sizes, from small startup ISVs through to the multinational conglomerates and giants like Microsoft, Symantec, HP, and Dell. What's fascinating about today's conversation is the ability to go deep on channel strategy and really unpacking how to make the channel more profitable into the future and how to grow together with your partners, with the right partners. So let's get into the conversation. Hey, Harald, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you, Jeremy. I've been looking forward to this. I've looked at some of your other podcasts, and you got some really good guests, a lot of good content. And for those that are viewing this, I would really recommend two in particular: the Canellis one with Jay McBain, and the Schneider Electric on the MDF. The content on both of those were outstanding.
Oh, thank you. So you've been working in the channel a really long time. Before we get into the York Group and where your focuses are with channel, could you give me a bit of a background? What's your origin story? Where did you start, and how did you get to where you are today?
Well, I'm from Norway originally. I moved to the U.S. to finish a master's degree and stayed in the U.S. and then started doing some international business development for companies from Arizona. And one of those companies was, and I'm going to give you a little bit of a history of channels and how channels have evolved. One of those companies was one of the early franchise companies. So in the early days of PCs, there were companies that set up franchise because nobody knew what a PC was, nobody knew what software was. So they had the McDonald's concept. There were companies like Computerland, Intercom, and the one that I represented was Microwave Computer Centers. And so everyone was getting into the computer industry: teachers, accountants, lawyers. This was the next big thing, but they didn't know anything about it. So they had this whole concept of, this is how you set up your store. These are the brands that you carry. And it was a franchise model where they charged an upfront fee for territory and a royalty of 6%. And that model worked for a while until these store operators got to know what they were doing. And they said, why are we paying 6%? And there was a rebellion against these franchise operators on the fee structure, and they couldn't sell new territories. And then it became a distribution business. And the franchise operations all lost out to the specialty distributors, companies like Tech Data and Ingram, that knew how to move product. And that became the value add for the channel from a distribution standpoint. They didn't need the know-how. They had the skills. They had the customers. What they were looking for was someone that could distribute products to them very cost effectively and on time. So then the model switched to distributors, and these franchise operators became resellers. And in the early days, so we got into this. So Microwave, I moved to France for an 18-month project with Microwave and a European partner that were going to drive this franchise concept across Europe. And they hit it right at the top when things were going downhill. So it was very difficult to get the franchise operation set up. But moving from Phoenix to Paris was quite an experience. And my wife and I looked at each other, well, do we want to go back to Phoenix, live in the desert, or do we want to stay in the Paris area? And she said, no, we want to stay in Paris. And so we kind of reconstituted the business from there, working with American software companies that were expanding into Europe, because I had developed a really good contact network. And so we're doing this in the 90s. So I was really one of the first channel development consultants, one of the pioneers in this space, because channels were just emerging. Client server software was emerging. VC-funded companies were emerging. And channels were looking for new products to sell. Everything was new. So building out a channel at the time, when you were a VC-funded company from the US, was quite easy. Everyone was looking to grow their business. Everything was a net new logo because they had a limited customer base. They were all looking to expand their business. And so that's when channels really became an important part of the business model. And then the big companies like Microsoft and Adobe, they all professionalized the channels. So those are the early days. And we'll get into the conversation about how the channel has changed. But that's how I got started.
So you're on the front end of channel consultation. You're developing market entry. I would imagine there's a lot of cultural transformation required. Is that something that you started getting into as your you've got Norwegian background, American educated, now Paris based? You're helping
Yeah.
American software companies enter Europe. I would imagine that there was a lot of change that's happening within you, as well as you're not just taking on this new beast of channel strategy in its infancy and growing wildly, but at the same time also helping organizations shift culturally as well. Would you say?
Oh yeah, yeah. So at its core, 90% of business is the same everywhere. Somebody makes something, somebody sells something, somebody buys something. But how that is executed varies by culture. And there's a huge cultural gap between European countries. So a French company is very poorly trying to sell into Germany. French companies don't do well selling into the UK. UK companies don't do well selling into Italy because it's not a European market. And one of the things that we found out very early was that US companies thought that, well, we'll go to the UK or we'll go to the Netherlands and we'll set up our office and we'll sell to Europe. And it doesn't work that way unless you set up local operations as well. The cultures are different. The way they use language is different. The perception of contracts. So US companies are very driven by legal agreements. The legal agreements are very important because they define the relationship. So very often you have a US company with a reseller agreement that is 20, 30, 40 pages long because they want to anticipate every eventuality in the contract ahead of time. Because if it's not in the contract, it becomes a loophole and it becomes an opportunity for the partner that discovers the loophole to get around something and take advantage of their partner. In France, it's much more, well, we need 2 pages and we need a 2-page agreement saying that we are going to work together to create this opportunity and achieve this objective. And if things don't work out, we'll sit down and figure it out. So two big changes. So a US company would go to France, a French reseller would like the product, they would sign the contract without even reviewing it, they'd put it in the drawer. And then a week later, a question would come up and they would call the US vendor and say, hey, Jack, we need to get this resolved. And Jack was like, Philippe, look at paragraph 6.1.3. It's addressed in there. And the guy says, well, I haven't really read the contract. So there is a big cultural difference. The way the French and the Southern Europeans refer to American and UK business practices have an Anglo-Saxon way of doing business. Very straightforward, make decisions, get things done. And we were doing the channel development for a US company in France. And we said it was like a 6-month process. And we had the perfect partner for them in France. It was a fairly large French systems integrator. And this was going to be a strategic product for them. And we're dealing with this at the CEO level. The company had about 2,300 employees. So it's a fairly sizable operation in France. The US managing director or CEO went over to France to finalize the agreement. We had our business sessions. And then, as the French do, they said, hey, we've arranged for a very nice table, a reservation at a nice restaurant. We've got lunch scheduled from 12 o'clock to 2 o'clock. Let's head over. And the American CEO said, I think I'll just go back to the hotel and work out.
Right.
And that was the end of it. There was just no relationship. So there are cultural differences that you have to be sensitive to, but people travel more. And I think they understand that things are going to be different. So as long as there's some level of tolerance for differences, then it works out. As long as the fundamentals are in place. It's when people get really focused on the details of a contract or the relationship and they try to manage it based on those details that things don't work out because those details will be different in Japan, in Singapore, Australia, or France.
I am fascinated by this background and I think really inspired by it as well. Being an American living in Australia, raised in Germany, and having this multicultural background as well, and having the ability to navigate with humility and with empathy is really powerful, and I think often under celebrated in terms of how valuable it can be. And so it's amazing to hear that you grew into this, but then thrived into it. Now,
Yeah.
since the
Well,
'90s and the early days, you've expanded and worked across, I think you mentioned some 20 some odd countries at this point.
we
Did that
work with
happen organically over time?
Yes. So what happened was in the 90s, we ended up with some products that were very early in the US, very early in Europe, that became international successes. And so we started out working across EMEA, and we built a channel, and those products were generating millions of dollars of revenue. And then we took those products into Latin America, Asia Pac, and built out a similar network in those markets. So that's how it grew. And our business model has always been subcontractors and partners. More when we want to be fancy, it's kind of the KPMG model where people work independently, and there's a revenue sharing model with a percentage that sticks with the house. So the people that have the client in one country get a percentage of the revenues. The people that are doing the work in another country get a percentage of the revenues. And so it's all very much based on performance, and that worked out well for our client because there are so many jurisdictions where you simply don't want to have employees. If you can avoid it, you don't want employees in Europe because of the legislation there. So then that grew very quickly, and then we hit the tech bubble in 2000 to 2004, and the business model changed. There was a huge shakeout both on the software side and the channel side, and the channel companies that survived because they had a strong customer base, and the business model for channel partners stopped being let's take on new products and look for net new logos and grow our business, became much more focused on how do we monetize and leverage the relationships that we have with our existing customers. So where before a new ISV, a new software vendor could go international and expect even a small to mid-sized partner to invest in sales and marketing to grow the logos in the marketplace, now it's very much, no, what can we sell to our existing customers? Is there an opportunity with those existing customers? So the business model has been turned upside down. And for especially early stage software companies, it's become very, very difficult for them to establish a meaningful relationship with what we call the traditional channel partners for a couple of reasons. One is the channel partners are reluctant to take on the risk of a new product. And it is a risk. And I'll come back to that because it's an important element. As we were growing our business, things didn't always work out. And I couldn't understand why. So we sat down and we analyzed all of the point-to-point relationships that we had set up for all the products and all the channel partners, because we'd have a partner that was very successful in Denmark with one product, for example, but a partner in Brazil who had the same profile as the Danish partner and selling the same product wasn't successful, or from our perspective, wasn't doing well. And so we sat down and analyzed everything that we had done and the outcome. And we had some epiphanies. One of them was that what we found out was that we are, with our channel partners, we are either strategic or we're not. When we started the business, we thought that there would be a linear progression of performance by partner. One partner, one market would sell one license, one stuff, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we found out, no, it's either they really adopted the product as part of their business or they didn't. And if they didn't, it becomes very opportunistic and reactive. And so the difference in performance between a partner that sells on a consistent basis and the opportunistic one is orders of magnitude. And if you look at most channel programs today, people talk about the Pareto rule, the 80-20. It's not. That's aspirational. If you look at most partner communities today, if a vendor has 5 to 10% of his partners performing on a consistent basis, that's pretty good. Very, very few have 20%. Look at Microsoft. Microsoft has somewhere in the order of magnitude of about 400,000 partners worldwide. 10% of them have silver and gold competencies. They've made that investment in Microsoft. That's 10%. And Microsoft drives a really organized professional channel program with training and progression, and really encouraging the partners to build up their competencies within Microsoft. So that was one epiphany, was that either we're important or we're not. And then we understood why we weren't important and why we might be. And it was all around aligning the business model. One of the things that we, in the early days, misunderstood was how much risk we were asking the partners to take on. And because we had the same attitude as our customers, we fell in love with the product. They had this great little solution. They were doing okay at home, wherever home was. And all the partners had to do was go out and sell it. And the partners looked at it and said, we don't look at you as an opportunity. We look at you as a risk. We're making money. We have a business. We have 2 or 3 strategic products. We have a portfolio of another 20 or 30 products in case people ask, because the channel ended up specializing for the most part. The ones that survived, they specialized in a vertical. They became retail specialists in manufacturing, financial services, or they specialized in certain application areas, became security or collaboration, financial services. They had special areas of specialization. And that specialization was very often driven by the success of 1 or 2 products initially. And they were the ones that they just happened to be really good at. So they became really good at retail. And so they added more solutions. But their business is still driven by a core set of products that drive most of the revenues, the ones that are important to them. So when we come in as a new vendor, we want to be strategic product number 3 rather than portfolio product number 31. And what that means is that that channel partner has to change their internal processes, because everything now is focused on those 2 or 3 products that drive 90% of the revenues. Sales, marketing, admin, customer support, order processing, everything is built around those products. And so when we come in as a new vendor, we are going to disrupt what they're doing today. And the more of a disruption we are, the less likely it is that's going to be successful. So we're coming in and saying, oh, you need to learn something. You need a new competency. That's a real disruption. You need to invest in marketing. That's a real disruption. And so when an ISV goes and approaches the channel partner, they're often speaking in different language. The ISV is so proud of this product. They spent about 20 man years sweating blood building this product, and they put all their engineering skills into it, and they underestimate what it takes to sell something. So from the partner's perspective, when the software vendor comes knocking on the door, they look at it as, you're asking me to take on a lot of risk. And you say, well, what risk are you taking on? Well, first of all, sales and marketing risk. It's the risk that we put some money into a sales and marketing program and it doesn't work for whatever reason. Wrong message, wrong product, wrong customers, wrong economy. It didn't work out. But that's part of the business model, and the channel partners accept that. That's part of their role. If they take on a new product, they'll do something to test it out. So that's one level of risk. The second level of risk is that they do quite well with it, and especially with the SaaS product. So you have Johan in Germany that does really well with a new solution, and he's building up his revenues. And it takes typically 12 to 18 to 24 months under recurring revenue model for the channel partner to get to a revenue level that's sustainable and generating profits. But not just Johan, but partners in 3 or 4 other markets are doing well, and the ISV gets acquired. So Microsoft comes in and buys them, or Oracle, or Amazon, or Google. Someone buys them that has an existing infrastructure of partners. So Johan wakes up because now his vendor's been acquired. The next morning, there are 600 other Microsoft partners in Germany that are now certified and authorized to sell this product. So whatever preferential relationship Johan had with the ISV goes out the window. So there's a huge risk for the channel partner making this investment upfront in the sales and marketing, absorbing the losses while they're building up the revenue stream, that revenue stream is going to disappear, either because the ISV gets acquired, or in some cases, the ISV says, oh, Johan is doing $3 million. We're getting $3 million a year from Johan, and he's getting a 40 or 50% margin. That means that his top line is 6 or 7 million. Now, why don't we just set up our own office, cancel the contract with Johan, and sell direct and keep all that money ourselves? We can set up an office with 4 people. And what the ISV doesn't understand is that Johan has the relationships with those customers. And when Johan gets canceled and an American company or an Australian company or South African company comes in and tries to usurp that position, they don't want to deal with that company because they feel that their vendor that they've had a relationship with has been poorly treated. So that's the second level of risk. The third level of risk is that Johan takes this unknown product to Deutsche Bank, which has been a client for 15 years, one of his strategic accounts. Deutsche Bank looks at this and, yeah, we got a project that's just really well. They take a look at it, they put it through testing, and they come back with 6 pages of questions, because that's what Germans do. So he has 6 pages of technical questions, and Johan sends that to the vendor in Dayton, Ohio, and the vendor says, we're trying to close out our quarter, Johan. We don't have time for this, and just pushes it aside. So what does Johan put at risk here? His relationship and his reputation with Deutsche Bank on behalf of a brand that nobody knows in Germany. So the quality of the vendor and their support for the channel partners becomes that third level of risk. And very often, early stage software companies simply don't know how to be good partners. They know how to develop a good product, but they don't know how to support a partner and make sure that they're taken care of and their customers are taken care of. So when you look at it from that perspective, the channel partner is expected to take on an enormous amount of risk. And all the ISV is providing is the IP. So this is why, and especially in today's environment, channel partners are very, very reluctant to make a new product strategic. All the changes internally, the targets, the expectations, the investment, but yeah, all the risk that they're taking on with that new vendor. So that was a big epiphany for us, and that became kind of the fundamental that okay, we need to understand that. So when we're now going out and recruiting a channel partner, we're not having a product or technology discussion. We're having a business discussion. We have to understand what the business model is for them. And then we address this. So we have to understand it. And so that gets us to the next element of the channel is that a lot of early stage ISVs in particular, they think that channels are channels are channels. Partners are partners are partners. They don't make a distinction between different business models. And there are so many different types of channel partners now. So there are the traditional VARs, the value-added resellers that we've talked about. There are systems integrators. There's MSPs, managed service providers. There are LSPs, licensed solution partners. Like in Australia, you have Data3, you have Crayon, you have SoftwareOne. The companies that do the high volume licensing of enterprise agreements for the major global vendors. You have two-tier distributors. You have consulting organizations. And each one of them has a different business model. And so when a software company is going to a new market, they have to figure out, so what business model is best suited for their product? Do they have a product that is purely transactional or no services, and the only revenue that the partner is going to make is from the margin on the product? Then that's one business model. Or is it a very complex enterprise solution that is going to drive a ton of services, and that's going to become an SI model? Is it so when you and there are a lot of products that simply don't work with a distribution channel. The distributors are working with resellers. Resellers are working primarily with SMB customers. And so it's a high volume business. And so how do you make it interesting for a distributor? Well, the distribution business today is a pay for play typically. And that you want to go to a distributor and want them to push you out to their channel, then you're going to write them a check to drive the marketing campaigns, to do the seller onboarding. And it's just a pure pay for play. And for most smaller companies, they don't have the luxury of doing that. They don't have the budget to do it. But yeah, so for each type of solution, where we start off with is, so who's going to buy the product? And when they buy the product, what's involved in the transaction? What does the transaction look like? And based on that, what are the most suitable partners? And then what is the business model going to be? So that if we go and talk to an SI, we're not going with a product that is just purely transactional and it's transacted over the web. Zero interest for them. We're looking at a more complex solution that can drive hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars in services. But then it becomes a low volume play for the ISV because the systems integrator is really just looking at the services component. The IP is just a way of driving a project or being included in a bigger project. And that's why for a lot of channel partners, there's a mismatch between what it actually takes to sell and support the product and the profile of partners that they're chasing.
There are many points to unpack here, and I think some of the points you mentioned we could dedicate a whole show to really go deep. The concept of opportunity versus risk is illuminating for me, particularly because working on both sides, both at partner level, trying to deal and make sense of having a stack of, let's say, upwards of 12 vendors that they partner with, that they're bundling solutions around and taking to their end users, but also being exposed to the vendor side and how to enable partners and work with them and so forth. Even today, I see this real mismatch in the way you're describing it as opportunity versus risk. I think paints language around there's a I don't know whether it's an institutional ego or a brand ego or something at the vendor side, where it seems to be a belief that if you just bolt onto us, that
Right.
your profit margins will go through the roof, that you have
Yeah.
all this opportunity, that if you get in with us, you have it
Right.
made.
Yeah. Right.
And
That's,
and
that is,
there's a deeply held belief. And this is, while what you're talking about seems so common sense, this belief goes deep at the ISV level, that they are the enabler, that they
yeah.
are
Yeah.
that they are the ultimate unlock for their partners, and the reality couldn't be further from it.
No, every ISV has that approach, almost down the line, and they all have the same pitch. They're talking to a channel partner, saying, "You'll love our product. It's the best product. It's the only product in the world that does blah blah blah." Because they've all read "Crossing the Chasm," so we're unique, and you can use our product to upsell to your existing customers, and you can use it to open up new accounts. What could be better? But when a channel partner hears that day in and day out from hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, thousands of ISVs that are contacting them without having done any research into who they are, who their customer base is, and the services that they provide. On the risk side of it, let me just tell you, I use anecdotes and stories to illustrate a lot of the points. That's what people walk away with. That's what they remember. And on the risk side, we use a story about the three-legged pig. Farmer Bob goes to visit his friend Farmer John. He parks his car, jumps out, and he sees a little three-legged pig limping around the barnyard. And Bob says, "Hey, John, what's the deal with the pig?" And John says, "Oh, Bob, that's a very special pig. That is no ordinary pig. A couple of weeks ago, in the middle of the night, our house started burning. That pig came in, oinking and squealing, woke us all up, saved our lives, and probably the house. 2 days ago, my little boy fell into the pond. That pig dove in and pulled him to safety. Now, a pig like that, you don't eat all at once." That's the fate of a channel partner. They're expected to create all of this value for their vendors. And the business model for a channel partner is that they are going to be consumed one way or another. They're going to be replaced with other channel partners. They're going to be replaced by direct sales. They're going to be replaced by a marketplace. The vendor will do whatever they can at some point to reduce the revenue stream or the margins that go to their channel partners.
It's interesting to think about that anecdote as well as this concept in light of recent reminders that change can be radical and swift and global. And the reality has been shown recently, even with Broadcom making large scale changes in the VMware side of their channel. And that was, I mean, they gave them 30 days notice. I mean, the radicality of these changes are swift, and that just highlights even more this risk that these guys carry.
Yeah, absolutely. So what they're much more likely to do is just kind of focus on the business that they have at hand, and for them to add something new to the equation. An exception to that, and this is a risk to ISVs, is that a channel partner has just lost one of their two strategic vendors. So a big chunk of the revenues are gone. But what do? Frantically search for a replacement product. Right. And the way channel relationships are established is a very typical pattern. And it's that the ISV gets an email or an outreach from a channel partner in some market. Very often channels don't develop because there's a structured outreach. It's because they're getting inquiries. And so they get an inquiry from a partner in Albania. And the Albanian partner calls them up and says, "I know that you are a Microsoft or an AWS partner, and I'm an AWS or Microsoft partner. I've found your solution, and I have a customer that needs your solution. We love your product, and we'd like to be your partner." Now, what does an ISV do in a situation like that? The human nature is, "Oh, wow, you found us, you love us, you want to work with us? Yes, here's our agreement. And let's get started," because they got that opportunity. Well, the minute the ISV sends that agreement to the partner knows that the ISV has no clue as to what they're doing. Why would they send a reseller agreement without any qualification, no business discussion, no planning? Channel partners know when a vendor has a structured program and they don't. So the channel partners contact them because they have an opportunity. They have a customer that is going through a bigger project. They need several slices of technology. The channel partner didn't have that particular slice. They do a search on the partner website. They find that ISV and they contact the company in Dayton, Ohio. And it's only to fulfill that one customer. In the meantime, they sign a contract with a Dayton company. and now they are an Albanian reseller for this company. They're getting a 30 or 40 or 50% margin. And then the ISV sits back and waits. Okay, now that you've done this, we've been through this process, we've provided all the support, go out and fetch. And the partner doesn't. Because number one, the ISV has just shown themselves to not have a clue as to what it means to have a channel program. And they were just contacting for that one opportunity. And if they could get a 30 or 40 or 50% margin, then great. They're happy to sign the contract. Now they have a whole drawer full of those types of contracts. The other scenario is where the partner has lost one of their strategic accounts, and now they're frantically trying to make up for the revenue, and they go out and they'll sign up 20 or 30 or 40 and spray the market with an initial outreach and see if any of them land and get traction. In all of those cases, one of the risks that the ISV does that, an ISV will look at that and say, well, it's a found opportunity. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But if they do that in an important market like France or Germany or Italy or Australia, and they didn't really have a structure and a strategy around channels, but they've ended up with these random ad hoc relationships. They have people that quote unquote represent them. So now they've had Jean-Pierre in France represent them for 3 years. They had that one initial deal. And then a year later, they got an email from one of their sales reps saying, oh, we have another opportunity, but it's a different sales rep that went through the first deal. So he doesn't really know the product well enough to sell it. And they say, well, could you please get on a call with us and make the presentation and help us? So the vendor, quite naturally, to support the partner, gets on, they go through all of these things. And they really drive the sales process. And maybe they do the POC and they do everything they need, they can do. And they close the deal. And the partner collects their 30 or 40%. And then you sit back and say, well, I've got 2 of them. Go out and fetch. And nothing happens. 2 years later, they did the same thing, rinse and repeat, because it's all very random. And for not what's happened for the ISV is that they've got 2 or 3 customers that they might or may not be able to support, but they're relying on a partner who doesn't know the technology well enough. So they're getting probably all of the support calls directly to them or through the partner back to them. So they're absorbing all of the costs that are supposed to accrue to the channel partner. But then they've done well in the US and they've been to Australia, they've done well in Australia, they've done well in the UK, and now France is a strategic market. That's saying we're really going to focus on France because we have a couple of references. So they start going through the partner recruitment process, and they have some very qualified companies that they're talking to. And then those companies come back and say, hey, wait a minute, Jean-Pierre is your reseller in France. Well, yeah, but he's not a serious partner. It's just very random. Yeah, but Jean-Pierre's had it for 3 years. Jean-Pierre's got these other products that he does really well with. So what's the issue here? Is it Jean-Pierre? Is it the product isn't suitable for France? Is it you as a vendor? You've actually polluted the market for your brand by having something just sit on the shelf or the competition is going to use that. So your competition might be better established in France. And now your new partner is going up against them. And the other channel partner is going to say, that product's been in France for 3 years and only 2 customers use it. You really want to take the risk, Mr. Customer, of buying this product that nobody wants. So there's an opportunity cost, a hidden cost reputationally that ISVs don't necessarily appreciate when they have this network of opportunistic, reactive, ad hoc partners around the world.
Let's say I've got a channel program and I've got and I'm not deeply cognizant about which partners are profitable or which aren't. I've just been growing my channel program, and as you've been saying, I've therefore been attracting a lot of these opportunistic partners. They're individually not really growing, but I look really good because I've been growing net new logos into our channel program, and therefore our business appears to be growing. I haven't really needed to go deep into the metrics. If I were to start, what would I be doing and what would I be uncovering within the partner base? Is this where you're talking about if 5% of my partners are transacting well, I'm actually on par with most channel programs? And then what do I do about it? Where do I start?
The fact that you're on par doesn't mean that it's acceptable.
Right.
So you get to the point where somebody says, we've got 800 partners, and why are only 40 of them actually producing revenues? And we need to take a look at this. And because everyone talks about, okay, you've got your performing partners, and then you have the long tail partners. And what do you do with that long tail? And what companies don't always really calculate is, well, what is the cost of support? Because they all look at it as well. If they throw us a deal every once in a while, it's all additive. It doesn't matter. So there's no cost associated with it. But I've been through a number of scenarios like that. And there's a company up in Montreal. They had hundreds and hundreds of partners. They only sold indirect. And the regional managers that managed the local partners were all comped on just the top line revenue. So they didn't care if a partner produced 5,000 or 6,000. It's all additive for them to help their comp. And I sat down with the CFO, and we went through a couple of different levels of analysis. I said, Alain, that's the guy's name. Alain, why don't you let's calculate your partner break-even point. He said, what do you mean, partner break-even point? I said, yeah. So take all of your direct costs that are associated with supporting this entire network. There were 800 partners in that network. And so the cost of the offices, your regional managers, marketing, SPIFs, MDF, everything that is directly associated with the channel. Take that number and divide it by 800. And they did. And the number was 17,000. And he said, oh. And I said, okay, but it's worse than that. That's just a nominal break-even point. Now look at all of your support calls and break that down by revenue. And what they found was that 60% of the calls came from partners that represented 6% of the revenues. So the actual cost of the non-performing partners was much, much higher than the $17,000. So I said, okay, we need to do something. And I said, yes. So what do you do about that long tail? And we went through an exercise of analyzing the partners and putting them in you always have the 4 quadrants, right? The magic quadrants. And so the top left were what we would call them the low performer, high potential. And very often those are partners that weren't selling a lot of your product because they were married to a competitive product. But that's what drove their business. They wanted you as plan B or as a fallback, as an option. But if you can do a win back strategy with those companies, then the improvement in performance is orders of magnitude, because they go from not selling much at all to selling a lot. They go from being opportunistic to being strategic. The top right-hand quadrant were high performers, high potential. And that's the sweet spot. That's the 5%. That's the 5% that is generating a lot of revenue, but also growing and investing and continuing to drive new logos. The bottom right is the most frustrating quadrant. Those are the high performers, low potential. Those are the partners that hit typically $400,000 or $500,000 in revenues, because that's what one salesperson can generate if they're dedicated to a product. They're generating $400,000 to $500,000 and had absolutely no interest in moving from it. That was the part of the business that they allocated to this vendor, and you can never go back to and say, well, how do we get this to $1 million? How do we grow? They weren't interested. And so for those partners, you say, okay, well, fine, we'll just maintain. Very happy to do what you're doing, and we'll just support you. The bottom left is the long tail. Those are the partners that don't produce. And there you have to make a decision. Do you move them up? Do you move them out? Or do you change the compensation structure? A lot of times ISVs, as they're growing their program, they don't manage or change the margin structure. And they're overpaying the non-performers because they got 30%. When they close the deal, they're getting 30% on renewals. But why are you paying the 30% for fraternity on renewals when they're not putting any effort into it? And that's where there's a real potential to drive more growth. And so in that quadrant, the exercise is to go back to them with a kind of a new improved program. But you give them a decision. Are you in or are you out? And if you want to maintain your 30%, then you have to make an investment in marketing, and you have to hit a certain revenue target or a net new logo target in order to maintain the 30%. And whatever that level of certification is. And if you're willing to buy into it, we will take some of that margin and give it back to you in MDF, but co-funded MDF. And then you make it, but you have to give that opportunity to everybody. You can't just start slashing. There has to be a quid pro quo enough trade. Right. And then you find out the ones that are willing to make an investment. If they're not, then drop their margin. I went through this with another, it's a smaller company. They had 140 partners, but the partners had been with them forever. And they were all getting 40% on everything. 40% on net new, upsells, renewals, maintenance, everything was 40%. And when we went through that exercise and we slashed the non-performers from 40% to 10%, it freed up $1.8 million in annual cash flow for the vendor.
Unreal.
And I said, okay, so take half of that and put that into marketing. of this. So now you have $900,000 in marketing. Take 300,000 of that and just give that, no strings attached, to the top right quadrant. Because they're going to put it to good use. They want to grow their business, and you'll get a return on it. Just here's $50,000. Go spend it. Drive new business for us. Take another chunk and use that for a win back program to get that top left hand quadrant. And then whatever's remaining goes to the bottom left that actually sign up and say, yep, we'll sign up for a $20,000 market campaign. Here's our 10,000. Here's your 10,000, and we really want to make this work. But you still have not $900,000 left over every year. And so you have this real boost in activity in 3 of the 4 quadrants. That's one that you can't do anything with. Boost in activity. And you also then can filter out the non-performers. And if you're willing, if they're, the big pushback that I get from vendors when we go through that exercise, well, yeah, but they're going to be really upset with this. That's so. You think they're going to say no to 10%? Yeah, they're going to be upset. That's right. Yeah. And then say, yeah, but what if they sell the company? Well, they're not selling you today. So what's the downside? You're just freeing up cash. And sometimes you just have to take that brutal decision, business decision, to do what's best for you when partners have outlived their usefulness. And in some cases, well, below this level, if they never get beyond 5 or 10,000 and there's no hope for growth, let's just get rid of them, because we can cut down the overall infrastructure cost of maintaining channel partners that aren't producing revenue.
It must be so confronting for them to consider large-scale change like this, because there's this paradox of not wanting to rock the boat too much and lose partners, but at the same time, that might be the best outcome to shed the bad fit partners.
But once they see the numbers, that's okay. We're talking about millions of dollars here, and really accelerating the growth of the performing partners, and it becomes okay. Yeah, we just need to do this. They haven't really gone through the calculation, so they don't know what the carrying costs are of the long tail, the non-performing partners. Very often you have in these organizations, especially if they have a direct and an indirect sales channel, they're both reporting up to the vice president of sales, which we never recommend. I mean, there should be a different reporting structure. Then the partners are the second most important, because the direct sales will always drive the bigger chunk of revenues. And so every 2 years, they'll look at their channel and say, this isn't really working the way we expected. And they just replace the channel manager, and they'll assign a pre-sales person or somebody from the marketing department. Hey, why did you go run channel for 2 years? It takes that person 2 years to really understand the things that we're talking about now, the real dynamics of the channel and what they need to do. And by that time, there's, why haven't you grown our revenues through the channel by another 10 or 20%? We'll just replace. So as you get this constant turnover in channel management, that makes it very difficult to have continuity and to build a strong foundation. And then ultimately, nobody is really responsible for fixing the problem that's accrued over many, many years.
Yeah, and that's a killer right there. Nobody owns any of this. I want to take you back to a point you were making earlier around relationships. And you mentioned Jay McBain earlier, and this is something that's been core to his messaging over the past year and beyond, around partnerships and what constitutes a real thriving partnership and the relationships therein. He cites distributors like Pax8 as being the gold standard of developing relationships at grassroots level. And it's really taken a number of years of blind commitment to accelerate to being the fastest growing distributor globally now. Why is it so hard for business leaders in the channel to think strategically and pragmatically around developing relationships when they don't have the numbers to match up? If we develop relationship, we get X return. And how do we work through that to change the channel for an ASV going forward?
Yeah, it comes back to the different business models that different partner types have. So a distributor, Pax8, they do a really good job with SaaS solutions. They provide a lot of enabling services. There are a lot of training programs. But at the end of the day, they're still a volume-based distributor. And for an ISV to get meaningful mind share from a Pax8, no, you're going to go into the catalog. Pax8 will drive as initial campaigns of awareness, and they'll get you exposure with their channel partners. But then either you get traction or you don't, or you come in and you provide a funded marketing program to drive awareness and be a little bit more selective with the partners to be worked with. So it's still, for an early stage ISV, it's still a very difficult model to scale. So when we look at partnerships, let me back up a little bit and say, so what's the definition of a strategic partner? Because that's what you want. And when we're talking about partnership, it's really that partnership where both companies are working closely together. And what we found was that there are three characteristics of a strategic partner in the business model. The first is that there is at least a designated salesperson in the partner organization. Now that could be within a Paxate or Disney, it could be one person that is responsible for managing that ISV. So they all have account managers for the global ISVs because of the volume. And you can't really get that in a Disney model if you're a low volume ISV, but you can get that with potentially with an SI or with a VAR or other channel partners that are selling direct to the end user. So the first thing is somebody getting compensated for the revenue on your product. And it's something that a lot of ISVs overlook. They're signing a contract with a company. And then the company could be the owner of the company that said, oh yeah, and here's our revenue target is 300,000 for the first year. And now you sign a contract with a company. But a company doesn't sell products. People sell products. And if you're not getting down to the level of the salesperson in the organization, then it's simply not going to work. Because there's a disconnect between the owner or the management that signed the contract and the people that have to go out and sell. The people that have to go out and sell, they already have stuff to do today. They've got their KPIs, they've got their comp structure, and just throwing another product doesn't change. So what we want, the first part of it is, are you important enough to them that they will at least designate, not necessarily dedicate, but at least designate somebody that goes through training, gets to know your product well enough that they can sell it on their own, and then gets directly compensated, not just get a commission structure, but it also impacts their KPIs. And so if they don't hit the KPIs, they don't get the accelerators. So you're part of that comp mix. That's the one characteristic. The second is that the partner, whatever description is, commits to an activities-based marketing plan. So, in a direct sales organization, salespeople don't generate leads. They work on the leads that they get from the marketing department. And it's the same thing within a reseller organization. So if the reseller organization doesn't do a regular cadence of marketing activity, then there won't be any leads. Those leads won't go to the seller, and the seller won't bother. So as part of a contractual relationship with a strategic partner, we want to see a marketing plan we call that activity space. Do one thing every month to drive pipeline. That could be a seminar, a webinar, email campaign, SEO campaign, direct sales, whatever. And each partner has different comfort levels with things that they know work for them. That's fine. Just do whatever you do for these other products that you sell. Do that for us every single month. Because then you can monitor that, you can see the activity, and you can help them build a pipeline. Because the salespeople, once they have leads, they know what to do with it. They'll follow the leads and they'll pursue the leads, but they need to be fed those leads. And then the third element of the relationship is that you become part of their survival toolkit. What we mean by that is that you become important enough to their business that if you go away, it's going to have a real negative impact. They're going to feel the pain if you go away for whatever reason. And that means that when the economy turns, when they start cutting back on the priorities, you're not one of the things that they cut back on. And that's to say revenue impact that you have on the organization, not just from your product, but any pull-through revenue. It could be pull-through revenue from adjacent products. So you're selling a solution that always pulls through SharePoint or M365 or a CRM system because you have a point solution for a specific industry. And then the services. And this also becomes part of that business model planning. So if you, as a vendor, understand what's involved in your transaction, you can go to a partner and say, well, every time you sell our product and our product is $50,000, it pulls through $100,000 in services. You make the margin from that. It pulls through $50,000 of adjacent technologies. So when you create a solution, you now have a $200,000 solution. It's not the margin you get from our $50,000. It's the margin you get from the $200,000. That is a completely different business model but you have to connect the dots. As the vendor, it's your responsibility to connect the dots. And so the more you can impact their overall revenues directly and indirectly from your product, the more important you become, then the more strategic you are as well. And you have a longer term relationship. So those are the three things that we look at. Those are the three common characteristics. And this is also for an ISV. It also defines the partners that they're going after. Now, if you potentially can generate $500,000 or $1 million in revenue for a partner, well, for a partner that's doing $10, $20, $30 million, that's significant. But if it's a disty that's doing $1 billion, then it's the drop in the bucket. They don't care whether you go away, what happens to you. You don't move the dial for them. So can you get them? But then there are also large organizations that have broken down into groups. So a telco, for example, might have different teams for different verticals and different technologies. So the telco might have a huge revenue stream that you're not going to impact, but you could be very important to the healthcare part of their operations and the team that is running healthcare. And so you look at what the percentage of revenues that you can be for the people that make the decision about whether or not to invest in the sales and marketing to support your solution.
Harald, the sheer amount of experience that you've accrued, I think, is coming out in the clarity that you're able to paint for this. And I'm very, very appreciative of the way that you're able to articulate this strategic intent in a way that makes sense for people. It's just, I think business leaders on the ISV side who are either taking channels to market, and these are hyper intelligent people, but they believe that if they just build it, then they'll thrive. They think the sprint is just to get the channel up and running, and then hyper growth from there. And what you're really painting is the fact that the sprint to develop the program was really to sprint to the start line, that the race is actually starting at the point of launching the program, and there's a lot of work to be done from there. There's a lot
but when it works, the channels are the fastest, most cost-effective way for a vendor to expand into a new market. Very few vendors, even the large ones, are trying to push more and more of the stuff through the channel. Dell is doing that. And Cisco, VMware, they've always had, up until recently, maybe had really strong channel programs. Microsoft has had really strong. They've always been in the past proud that 95% of their sales go through channel partners. Now they are changing their business model because so much of what they do is just transactional. You don't have to provide services to process an enterprise agreement. So why are you paying a margin to someone that's just processing a license? And they're also putting more and more emphasis on the marketplace. So these are all dynamics that impact the channel partners because they're starting to lose what were traditional, reliable revenue sources.
You've given us so much to reflect on. I'm deeply appreciative of you sharing your insights, and thanks for coming on the show.
No, well, thank you very much for having me on the show. I mean, as you can tell, I love channels. When the model works, it's a thing of beauty, and it's a way for small companies to really grow exponentially at relatively low cost if they put the time and effort into building the program properly, or if they've been out there for a while and they have a partner program that isn't operating optimally, then there's remedial action. It all comes down to the very basic common sense things that they can do as far as they know what to do. One of the things that drives us crazy is that the companies overinvest in the technology and the process side of the channel. And then a lot of the partners don't care. They don't want another partner portal. They don't want all the structure. They want a meaningful, direct relationship with someone that they can rely on to help them when they're selling the product and if they have a question that comes up. It really comes back to where we started off at the very beginning, the cultural differences between ISVs and channel partners. If you can bridge that cultural divide and speak the same language, then you will really be able to develop a strong partnership.
It's words of wisdom there. Thanks so much, Harald.
Jeremy, thank you very much.